Okay, stay with me here, because what unfolded over the past 72 hours might represent one of the most reckless displays of diplomatic brinkmanship in modern American history. And here's what makes this moment so profoundly unsettling. It's not about whether Trump got his deal. It's about what he was willing to destroy to get it. Picture this. It's January 23 2026, in the Swiss Alps. Global financial markets are in freefall. Over $1.2 trillion in value has evaporated in a single trading session. European capitals are convening emergency summits. Bipartisan American lawmakers are literally flying across the Atlantic to apologize for their own president. And in Davos, Switzerland, Donald Trump stands before the world's economic elite to announce a framework deal on Greenland that supposedly resolves everything. But here's what the headlines celebrating Trump's supposed victory are missing. The framework he's bragging about doesn't actually give him Greenland. It doesn't transfer sovereignty. It doesn't accomplish the territorial acquisition he demanded. What it does accomplish, however, is something far more consequential and far more dangerous. It establishes a precedent that the President of the United States can threaten NATO allies with economic warfare and military invasion to extract concessions. And once that precedent exists, it doesn't disappear just because Trump backed down this time. Let me tell you what actually happened here, because the story you're getting from mainstream coverage is fundamentally incomplete. Trump's Greenland obsession didn't start in 2026. It's been festering since 2019, when he first floated buying the island, and Denmark's prime minister called the idea absurd. That rejection clearly stung him. When he returned to office in January 2025, Greenland was immediately back on his agenda. But this time, the approach was different. This time, he wasn't asking. He was demanding. By late 2025, Trump had appointed a special envoy specifically tasked with acquiring Greenland. He started framing it as a national security imperative, claiming Russia and China were circling the territory. And then in early January 2026, he made it explicit. He wanted total control. Not just enhanced military access, which the United States already possesses under a 1951 defense agreement. Not just resource partnerships. Total control, ownership. When asked if he would rule out using military force to take Greenland, Trump said, "We'll go as far as we have to." Think about that statement for a moment. Greenland is part of Denmark. Denmark is a founding member of NATO. The entire NATO alliance is built on Article 5, the principle that an attack on one member is an attack on all. Trump was openly threatening to invade a NATO ally and shatter the most successful military alliance in modern history. Denmark's response was unequivocal. Greenland is not for sale. Its 57,000 residents have a right to self-determination, and polling showed over 85% of Greenlanders opposed any American takeover. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen made it crystal clear the U.S. shall not take over Greenland. But Trump wasn't backing down. He ordered the Joint Special Operations Command to draw up invasion plans. When senior military officials pushed back, expressing deep concerns about the strategic insanity of attacking an ally, the order remained. And then came the escalation that triggered global panic. On January 18th, Trump announced 10% tariffs on 8 European countries: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland. Why these 8 specifically? Because they had deployed small military contingents to Greenland for a routine NATO training exercise called Arctic Endurance. Trump characterized this defensive training operation as a very dangerous situation for the safety, security, and survival of our planet. Let that sink in. NATO allies conducting a standard defensive exercise in NATO territory was, according to Trump, an existential planetary threat. The tariffs would start February 1st, rise to 25% by June, and remain until Denmark agreed to the complete and total purchase of Greenland. The global reaction was immediate and devastating. Within 24 hours, markets collapsed. The S&P 500 fell 2.1%, its worst single-day drop since October. The Nasdaq plummeted 2.4%. The Dow shed 870 points, more than $1.2 trillion in market value, simply evaporated. European markets tumbled in parallel. The CBOE volatility index, Wall Street's fear gauge, spiked to levels not seen in months. Gold hit record highs as investors fled to safety. But here's where this gets interesting. Here's the part that reveals what's really happening beneath the surface chaos. The market panic wasn't just about tariffs. Wall Street has weathered Trump's tariff threats before. The panic was about something deeper, the realization that American foreign policy had become completely untethered from strategic rationality. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent tried desperately to calm markets, urging investors to take a deep breath, insisting Trump had a strategy. The selling continued. Citigroup analysts wrote that the number and magnitude of impacts on U.S. equity markets is already dizzying, just 2 weeks into the year. The CEO of UBS said he saw no path to normalization in the near future. Meanwhile, the political fallout was exploding across multiple fronts. European leaders issued a joint statement calling Trump's threats a move that would undermine transatlantic relations and risk a dangerous downward spiral. French President Emmanuel Macron declared, "No intimidation nor threat will influence us." The European Union scheduled an emergency summit and began discussing activation of the anti-coercion instrument, a mechanism that would allow Brussels to impose sweeping restrictions on U.S. tech companies operating in Europe. Some analysts estimated that if Europe retaliated with full force, targeting not just goods but services, they could hit sectors representing nearly 1% of U.S. GDP. The EU-US trade agreement negotiated just months earlier was suddenly on hold. Canada, watching this chaos unfold, signed a new trade deal with China. The message was clear: if America's closest allies couldn't trust Washington, they would find alternatives. But here's what might be most significant. The backlash wasn't just coming from Europe. It was erupting from within Trump's own party. Bipartisan delegations of American lawmakers flew to Copenhagen to apologize. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, Democrat Chris Coons, Republican Tom Tillis, Democrat Jeannie Shaheen, all traveling together to reassure Danish officials that Congress opposed Trump's approach. Senator Tillis called the idea of seizing Greenland beyond stupid. Murkowski said the threat was completely inappropriate. Even Speaker Mike Johnson, generally supportive of Trump, said military action in Greenland was not something anybody's seriously considering. Senator John Kennedy, a Trump ally, called invading Greenland weapons-grade stupid. Why were Republicans, who had defended Trump through 2 impeachments, suddenly breaking ranks? Because the implications were too catastrophic to ignore. Taking Greenland by force would destroy NATO. It would end 75 years of transatlantic cooperation. It would legitimize exactly the kind of territorial aggression that Russia used in Crimea and China dreams of using elsewhere. And it would accomplish this destruction for what? For minerals that could be accessed through partnership. For military bases America already uses. Now let's talk about what happened in Davos, because this is where the narrative Trump wants you to believe diverges sharply from reality. On January 21st, Trump arrived at the World Economic Forum to meet with global leaders. The atmosphere was toxic. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had given a speech the day before warning that the rules no longer protect you and urging countries to reduce dependence on American partnerships. European leaders were coordinating retaliatory measures. Markets remained deeply unstable. Trump gave a speech that morning, and in it, he did something unexpected. He ruled out using military force against Greenland. Hours later came the bigger announcement. After meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Trump posted that they had reached the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. And because of this framework, he was canceling all the tariffs immediately. Markets erupted in relief. The Dow surged over 1%. The S&P jumped. The Trump always backs down narrative took hold. But here's what you need to understand. What exactly is this framework? Trump claims it's a great deal for the United States that gets everything we wanted. He mentioned deploying part of his Golden Dome missile defense system in Greenland. He talked about accessing rare earth minerals. NATO's Rutte said the framework would focus on bolstering Arctic security and ensuring Russia and China don't gain a foothold. He notably said that Greenland's sovereignty did not come up in his conversation with Trump, but Denmark and Greenland are telling a very different story. Denmark's foreign minister insists territorial integrity must be respected. Greenland's prime minister says sovereignty is a red line that cannot be crossed. They acknowledge they're ready to discuss cooperation, expanded partnerships, but absolutely not transferring control to the United States. So what's the actual deal? According to sources familiar with the discussions, it involves the U.S. getting enhanced access to military facilities in Greenland, which it already largely possesses under existing agreements. It involves cooperation on rare earth mineral extraction, though specifics remain unclear. It involves expanded NATO operations in the Arctic, but it does not, according to Danish and Greenlandic officials, involve any transfer of sovereignty or territory. In other words, Trump threatened to blow up the Atlantic Alliance, crashed global markets, triggered a bipartisan congressional revolt, and unified European opposition, all to potentially achieve outcomes the United States could have negotiated without any threats whatsoever. Let's talk about what this really means, because the implications extend far beyond this single episode. First, NATO has been fundamentally shaken. European leaders spent weeks genuinely uncertain whether their primary security guarantor might attack one of their members. That uncertainty doesn't vanish because Trump backed down. It's embedded now. Countries that depended entirely on American protection are developing contingency plans. What happens next time when Trump doesn't back down? Second, economic relationships are fracturing. Canada signed its China deal while this was unfolding. European leaders are openly discussing reducing dependence on American markets. When your most important trading partners can't trust that agreements will hold, capital moves elsewhere. And it is moving. Third, American credibility is disintegrating. For decades, the United States built its influence on the idea that alliances meant something, that partnerships were based on shared values, not just convenience. Trump's Greenland gambit undermines that foundation completely. If territorial integrity can be threatened over minerals and military bases, what exactly does American friendship protect you from? Fourth, the precedent. Trump's approach establishes that a president can use emergency economic powers, tariff threats, and military coercion to try to acquire territory from allies. What stops the next president from doing the same? What stops adversaries from pointing to this moment and saying, "See, the United States doesn't respect sovereignty either, but there's a counter-narrative worth considering"? Maybe this was always performative. Maybe Trump never intended to invade Greenland, and the entire episode was designed to pressure NATO into increasing Arctic security spending. Maybe he got what he wanted, a commitment to bolster defenses in a region increasingly contested by Russia and China. If that's true, the cost-benefit calculation looks different. But even then, the costs were staggering. Over $1 trillion in market value lost, allied trust damaged, congressional time wasted. For what? A vague framework that might result in outcomes achievable through normal diplomacy. Here's what happens next, and why the uncertainty is more dangerous than the crisis itself. The framework isn't a deal yet, it's a framework. Negotiations continue, but the Danish and Greenlandic governments have made their red lines clear. No sovereignty transfer, no territorial control. They'll discuss partnership and cooperation, but Greenland remains Danish, its future determined by Greenlanders. Can Trump accept that? Or will this cycle restart in a few months? The Trump administration has a pattern: escalate dramatically, back down partially, claim victory, then escalate again when attention fades. We might be in a temporary lull before the next round. Meanwhile, the Arctic is becoming a critical theater of great power competition. Climate change is opening new sea routes and making previously inaccessible resources reachable. Russia has been militarizing its Arctic territories. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is investing heavily in the region. Greenland sits at the center, with vast deposits of rare earth minerals critical for modern technology. The United States has legitimate strategic interests here. The question is method. Does America build partnerships based on mutual benefit and shared security? Or does it threaten, coerce, and demand? Trump's approach has been the latter, and the result is that Denmark and Greenland, which were previously open to increased cooperation, are now deeply wary. This is the chaos we're living through. A framework deal that might mean everything or nothing. Markets that rallied on relief, but remain uncertain about what comes next. Allies who want to trust American assurances, but can't forget that their president threatened economic warfare over territorial demands. A precedent established that power, not partnership, is the currency of this administration's foreign policy. The next few weeks are critical. If the framework produces genuine cooperation and Denmark feels its sovereignty is respected, maybe this becomes a near miss. But if Trump grows frustrated with negotiations, if he perceives obstruction, if he decides another tariff threat is necessary, we'll be right back here. And each time this happens, a little more trust erodes, a little more credibility is lost, a little more damage is done to relationships that took 75 years to build. Release or differently we're living with, not whether a deal will happen, but whether the system of alliances that defined the post-World War II order can survive a president who sees them as obstacles, whether democratic allies can trust that their sovereignty will be respected, whether markets can function when policy is made through dramatic threats and sudden reversals, and whether we look back at this as the moment when America's global leadership began its irreversible decline, not because of enemies abroad, but because of chaos at home. If this breakdown helped you understand what's actually happening with Trump's Greenland gambit, the details behind the headlines, and why this matters far beyond one deal, hit that like button and subscribe. We're living through historic moments, and it's important to understand them clearly, without spin or partisan talking points, just the facts and their implications. In the comments, I'm curious. Do you think this framework actually resolves anything, or are we just in a temporary pause before the next escalation? And what do you make of the broader pattern? The threats followed by walkbacks, the chaos followed by claims of victory. Is it strategy or improvisation? Let me know what you think.